Why did she leave? You ever wonder that? She had the haircut every fashion kid copied, the accent that made interviews feel like indie films, and the kind of energy that made even Karl Lagerfeld hit pause. One season she's everywhere. Chanel runways, Vogue covers, Burberry campaigns. The next, gone, vanished, like she never happened. No scandal, no headlines, just silence. But that's Agyness Deyn for you. She didn't play by fashion's rules. She was the glitch in the system. A bleach blonde tornado in Dr. Martens. She made the industry fall in love with weird, with loud, with not fitting in. So what happens when a girl like that decides she's had enough? This isn't your typical supermodel story. This one doesn't end on a runway. It ends somewhere real. So grab a snack, get comfy, and let's talk about the supermodel who said no thanks to fame and meant it. She crashed into fashion like a riot. Bleach blonde hair, a northern accent, thick with attitude, and a boyish grin that refused to play nice. She wasn't just different, she was disruptive. Chaos in stilettos, in a sea of willowy silhouettes and carefully muted elegance, Agyness Deyn hit the runway like a storm. Unpredictable, exhilarating, a little dangerous. She didn't walk, she marched. Chin up, shoulders back, every step a challenge. She looked like she belonged in a punk band, not a couture show. And that's exactly why everyone wanted her. In the hyper-curated world of 2000s fashion, where every detail was controlled and every model was meant to disappear into the clothes, Agyness did the opposite. She made the clothes vanish. All you could see was her design. Designers didn't cast her to blend in, they cast her to set fire to the room. She was the anti-supermodel of a new generation, and yet somehow the most super of them all. Magazines scrambled to put her on their covers. Editors called her the next Kate Moss, though really, she was no one's sequel. She was the main event. With her peroxide buzz cuts, neon wardrobe, and fierce refusal to be anyone but herself, she gave the industry something it didn't even know it was craving, a real personality. She partied with designers, fronted indie bands, styled her own shoots, and kept the world guessing whether she was playing dress-up or revealing her truest self. And then, just as fast as she came, she disappeared. No overdose, no public breakdown, no lawsuit or canceled contract, no final walk draped in symbolism, just silence. One moment, she was front row and front page, dominating the conversation, and the next, she was gone, vanished from Fashion Week lineups, absent from campaigns, no longer the muse of the moment. For an industry addicted to spectacle, her quiet exit felt almost sacrilegious. But for Agyness, it was everything. So where did she go? And more importantly, why? To answer that is to understand that this isn't a story of collapse. This isn't some tragic parable about a young woman broken by fame. There are no cautionary tales or caution tape here, no downward spiral. This is a story about conscious withdrawal, about choosing to disappear when the world expects you to shine louder. Agyness Deyn didn't burn out, she walked out, on her own terms. She had won the game. More covers than she could count, contracts that made her a millionaire before 30, adoration from designers and photographers and pop culture fanatics alike. She had everything. But that's exactly the problem. Because sometimes, when you get everything you thought you wanted, you realize it was never really yours to begin with. The fame, the persona, the lifestyle, all of it was curated, constructed, and constantly demanded more. She wasn't evolving. She was being consumed. To stay would meant performing herself into exhaustion. To leave meant finally breathing. Agyness once said in an interview that she'd become a brand, not a person. That the industry wanted Agyness Deynness, the look, the edge, the attitude, but they didn't want Laura Hollins, the girl from Manchester who once worked at a fish and chip shop. It was Laura who needed to reclaim her life. This is the story of a woman who pulled her own plug, who left behind the stage while the applause was still roaring, who realized that being seen by the entire world isn't the same as being known. Agyness Deyn didn't fade into irrelevance. She dove into reinvention. And maybe in a culture that glamorizes the spectacular fall, the most radical thing a woman can do is simply walk away. Her real name wasn't Agyness Deyn. It was Laura Hollins, born on February 16, 1983, in Littleborough, Greater Manchester, a quiet industrial town more famous for rugby clubs and factory smoke than high fashion. It was the kind of place where dreams stayed dreams, where ambition was considered suspicious unless it came with a paycheck and a pension plan. Raised by a single mother alongside 2 siblings, Laura didn't grow up in luxury or legacy. She grew up in hand-me-downs, surrounded by grit and practicality. But even as a kid, there was something offbeat about her. She didn't fit the mold, and she didn't want to. She wasn't the quiet girl in the corner. She had a voice, and she used it. Singing in a punk band, working behind counters in fish and chip shops, and at the now-defunct The Body Shop, Laura wasn't someone waiting to be discovered. She was someone waiting to break out. Unlike the polished discovery tales of supermodels who were spotted in a shopping mall, Laura didn't get that kind of fairy tale moment. There was no modeling scout, no glossy agent tapping her on the shoulder and saying she had the look. Instead, she built it from scratch. She studied people, studied faces, studied rebellion. She didn't chase acceptance, she chased disruption. She chopped off her naturally dark brown hair, buzzed it down to the bone, then bleached it until it glowed like a light bulb. She wore clothes that clashed on purpose. Baggy men's trousers, combat boots, neon cardigans, and strutted like someone who didn't care what you thought. And then, perhaps most famously, she changed her name. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to become someone else, someone new, someone bold. She consulted a numerologist, and out of that mystical process came Agyness Deyn, a name that sounded like a celestial warrior or a rock star from another planet. From that moment, Laura Hollins faded into the background. Agyness took over. She moved to London, throwing herself into the scene with a kind of wild-eyed hunger, not for fame, but for space, for freedom, for the chance to remake herself on her own terms. And fashion noticed. Not instantly, not all at once, but when it clicked, it exploded. By 2006, Agyness Deyn wasn't just in the industry. She was taking over. She was on the cover of every magazine that mattered: Vogue, ID, Dazed and Confused. She was in every campaign that wanted to make a statement: Burberry, Armani, Vivienne Westwood. She stomped down runways in London, Paris, Milan, and New York like she owned the air under her feet. She was the face you couldn't forget. Angular, animated, alien-like, her beauty was not soft, it was sharp, edgy, offbeat. She didn't seduce the camera, she challenged it. In an era that still clung to the remnants of polished perfection, Agyness Deyn came in like a battering ram. She didn't wear clothes, she wore personas. She didn't smile politely, she smirked, shouted, laughed with her whole face, and the world was obsessed. Suddenly, androgyny was back. Suddenly, personality was back. And Agyness wasn't just modeling fashion. She was redefining it. She made room for the odd girls, the loud girls, the strange girls, who didn't want to be pretty in the traditional sense. By the time the late 2000s rolled around, she wasn't just a model. She was a symbol of youth culture, of individuality, of rule breaking. Agyness Deyn was everywhere. But even then, underneath the bleach and bravado, something quieter was stirring. Because when you build yourself from the ground up, when you become a living character, there's always a question that lingers in the dark. How long can you play someone else before you start to disappear yourself? Agyness didn't sell polish, she sold defiance. Not the curated kind that gets packaged into a brand, but the kind that felt alive, volatile, unapologetic, unpredictable. She was the girl who wore combat boots under couture gowns without asking permission. She didn't glide into rooms, she crashed through them. Her lipstick was never perfectly applied. It was smeared like war paint, a signal that she wasn't here to be sweet or soft or palatable. In a world that worshipped symmetry, silence, and the slow perfection of beauty, Agyness Deyn was raw energy wrapped in chaos. She didn't pose, she pounced. She became the face of the era, not because she tried to be, but because she refused to act like one. She wasn't a trend follower, she was a trend detonation. Designers didn't just want her, they copied her. Entire collections began to echo her off-kilter masculine-feminine aesthetic. Runways shifted. Campaigns became riskier. Brands that once only hired serene, doe-eyed beauties now begged for edge, for mess, for her. Magazines fought over her like she was cultural gold. Vogue, ID, W numero love. They didn't just want her face, they wanted her energy. She wasn't just on the cover, she was the cover. Hair hacked into strange angles, expressions that didn't ask for your approval. styling that made no logical sense until suddenly everyone wanted it. Girls in high school bathrooms across the world stood in mirrors with scissors, hacking at their hair, trying to recreate that chaotic cool look that Agyness made magnetic. Her image bled into streetwear, editorial shoots, music videos. She was everywhere all at once. And it wasn't just the young or the alternative crowds who adored her. Fashion's most powerful gatekeepers bent toward her orbit. Anna Wintour praised her as a new kind of model, one that couldn't be controlled but had to be respected. Karl Lagerfeld, ever the image architect, adored her unpredictable spirit. She shot with Steven Meisel, Mario Testino, Nick Knight. Every major photographer wanted to capture her. Every brand wanted her to bring their clothes to life with that unfiltered punch of attitude. People called her the new Kate Moss. Not just because she was British or small or cool, but because she felt like a generational reset, a cultural pivot. But where Kate was the elegant mystery, Agyness was the loudspeaker. Where Kate dissolved into the fashion she wore, Agyness fought it, twisted it, turned it into something strange and new. And yet, under all that attention, something started to break. Not all at once, not in a dramatic, tabloid-friendly collapse, but slowly, quietly, in the places no one could see. Fame is heavy even when you wear it like armor. The same force that catapulted her into stardom began to pull at her edges. She had become a persona, Agyness, the wild child, the punk princess, the androgynous alien everyone wanted a piece of. But underneath the buzz cuts and the slogans, Laura Hollins still existed. And she was starting to suffocate. The louder the industry got, the quieter she became. Appearances became exhausting. Campaigns that once felt like performance art began to feel like routine. The girl who once reinvented herself for freedom now found herself trapped in a version of cool. She could no longer escape. The world wanted Agyness Deyn, but she was starting to wonder if she did. She was still in her 20s, but the price of fame was climbing fast, not in dollars, but in pieces of herself. On paper, Agyness Deyn was at the peak. She was the face of every major campaign, strutting at the front of every high-profile runway show, her image stamped on magazine after magazine like a cultural watermark. Designers fought to book her. Editors planned whole issues around her. To the outside world, she had it all. Success, money, influence, and the kind of iconic recognition that most models spend a lifetime chasing. But behind closed doors, where the lights dimmed and the cameras stopped clicking, she felt hollow. Like a vessel emptied by too many expectations, too many reinventions. The persona she had carefully created, the androgynous punk rebel with electric confidence and don't care swagger, had hardened into a mask. It no longer felt like performance. It felt like armor she couldn't take off. In rare interviews, you could catch glimpses of the fracture lines. She spoke in half-truths, sometimes laughing off the pressures, sometimes dodging questions with charm. But the truth bled through. She once said, quietly but with unmistakable weight, "I didn't know where Agnes ended and I began." It wasn't a dramatic confession. It was an unspoken ache. That quote wasn't about being tired. It was about being erased. This wasn't just burnout, the kind that comes from overwork and sleepless nights. It was identity erosion, the kind that creeps in when you spend too long performing a version of yourself that the world clings to. When every room you walk into reflects a version of you that you no longer recognize. When the applause becomes white noise and the mirror no longer feels honest. And this identity, Agyness Deyn, the icon, the archetype, the fashion phenomenon, had become so large that there was no space left for Laura Hollins, the girl who once worked in a chip shop and sang in grimy punk clubs, the girl who never set out to be famous but wanted to be free. So in 2010, at just 27 years old, she did the most un-Agyness thing imaginable. She ghosted the industry. No official statement, no runway farewell, no messy headlines or PR backflips. One season she was everywhere, the next gone. No one knew exactly when it happened. One day she was stomping down the catwalk in designer boots. The next she was simply not there. Calls went unanswered, agencies stopped sending out bookings. Fashion Week came and went without her trademarked strut. For an industry that thrives on drama and spectacle, her disappearance was deafening in its quiet. It wasn't a breakdown, it was a retreat. Not from the job, from the persona. From the machine that fed on her image while forgetting her personhood. She didn't want to be Agyness Deyn anymore, because somewhere along the line, being Agyness meant losing Laura. And so she walked away. No fanfare, no final look. Just a young woman stepping out of the spotlight, not because she couldn't handle it, but because she chose something rarer. She chose to reclaim herself. While tabloids speculated and the fashion world whispered about where she'd gone, Agyness Deyn was living in Brooklyn, quietly rebuilding a life far away from flashbulbs and front rows. She wasn't attending parties or chasing press. She was studying acting, learning how to speak truth with her body and voice in a way that had nothing to do with clothes or cameras. In 2012, she married actor Giovanni Ribisi, a relationship that surprised the media and felt like a sudden swerve from her previous life. The marriage was brief, lasting just a few years, but it wasn't a failure, it was a transition, a marker. A line in the sand, the model was gone, Agyness Deyn was no longer a fashion icon. Laura Hollins, the woman underneath it all, was trying to live. She wasn't running toward the spotlight anymore. She was walking toward something quieter, something real. She started appearing in independent films, slow, strange, deeply human stories that let her strip everything away. In Sunset Song, she played a Scottish farmer's daughter facing the brutality of war and patriarchy. In Electricity, she portrayed a woman with epilepsy, searching for her lost brother. Raw and unfiltered, there was no makeup hiding her face. No couture wrapping her in fantasy, just truth, vulnerability, silence. Her performances didn't scream, they didn't beg, they just breathed. Critics began to take notice, not because she was a former model trying to act, but because she wasn't trying at all. She wasn't performing for validation, she was reaching for something real. She wasn't looking to prove she was more than a pretty face. She wasn't auditioning for reinvention, she was reclaiming something. Not fame, not relevance, herself. This wasn't a career move, it was survival. It wasn't about pivoting from one spotlight to another, it was about stepping out of the glare entirely. She once said, "Modeling teaches you how to be wanted, but not how to want." And in that single sentence, she exposed the core emptiness of a life spent being seen, but not truly felt. That's what she was learning now. How to want. How to desire for herself instead of constantly being desired by others. How to feel without performance. How to live without needing the lens to validate her existence. In 2018, she quietly married hedge fund manager Joel McAndrew, a relationship far removed from the industry that once defined her. In 2021, they welcomed a daughter. A chapter written not in headlines, but in whispered lullabies and late-night feedings, in the unseen beauty of private love and ordinary life. You won't find her on red carpets anymore, dressed in designer labels and posing for flashes. You might catch her name buried in the credits of an indie film or hear it spoken in the hush of a theater performance, subtle and honest. She no longer needs the frenzy, the fandom, or the feedback loop of fame. She stepped out of character, out of the game, and into peace. Not because she faded, but because she chose something brighter. Herself, her family, her truth. Agyness didn't disappear. She disengaged. Deliberately, consciously, and without apology. She didn't vanish because she was lost. She left because she was found. She walked away from the very myth she had so artfully constructed, the cult of personality that once thrilled the fashion world, the image of the cool girl rebel with the buzz cut and the impossible cheekbones. She had played the part to perfection, but at some point she looked in the mirror and realized the reflection wasn't hers anymore. So she tore it down, not out of bitterness, not in defeat, but with intention. She burned it all down not because she failed, but because it was never real in the way that mattered. It was a costume and she was done wearing it. Her absence wasn't a tragedy. It wasn't a loss, it was a reclamation. A woman deciding, in a culture that feeds off overexposure, to take herself off the shelf, to stop being consumed, to choose stillness over spectacle. In a world where visibility is often mistaken for value, stepping away can look like failure. Some people call it quitting. They say she walked out on the spotlight too soon. They wonder what she could have been if she'd stayed, but they miss the point entirely. Because maybe the real power move isn't staying visible. Maybe it's knowing exactly when to leave. Not when the world is done with you, but when you are done with the world. When you recognize that the noise is no longer music, and the crowd no longer sees you but only the myth they want to believe in. Maybe the boldest act isn't to endure, but to escape. Agyness dynamic didn't fade away. She stepped out of the noise. She turned down the volume on everything that once defined her, and in doing so, she found something quieter, something deeper. Not applause, but authenticity. Not attention, but freedom. She didn't disappear, she just finally came home to herself. Today, Agyness Deyn lives quietly, far from the clamor of fashion weeks and the glare of flashbulbs, tucked into a life that asks nothing of her except honesty. No red carpets, no front row appearances, no curated glimpses into a glamorous routine for social media. She's not building a brand, she's not chasing relevance, she's not selling a lifestyle, she's living one. On her terms. She's traded fashion capitals for family, traded the runway for real life, and chosen a rhythm that feels authentic rather than aspirational. And yet, despite her physical absence from the spotlight, her legacy lingers like a shockwave that continues to pulse through the industry. You can still feel it in the subtle defiance of a model who wears a shaved head with pride. You see it in casting choices that prioritize edge over perfection, in the way androgyny is now not just accepted but celebrated, in the boldness of personal style that doesn't seek approval but makes a statement. Agyness made it okay to be strange, to be unpredictable, to be both delicate and dangerous. She opened the door for a generation of women who didn't want to be tamed, and who didn't need to be. What she showed us was radical, especially for the time. She showed us that it's okay to leave, that you can be at the height of your fame, the darling of designers, the face in every campaign, and still say, "This isn't what I want anymore." She taught us that it's possible to hold the world's full attention and still choose silence, that walking away isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Success doesn't have to mean clinging to the spotlight until there's nothing left of you. It doesn't have to mean milking relevance until the last drop. Sometimes, the most powerful form of reinvention doesn't come with a press tour or a Netflix documentary. Sometimes it comes in the form of absence, a refusal to play the game. Not every icon crashes, not every story ends in scandal, burnout, or public collapse. Some stories end with a woman quietly walking out the back door, closing it behind her, and never looking back. Agyness Deyn didn't leave because she couldn't keep up. She left because she saw clearly what so many others miss. That the longer you stay in a world that feeds on your image, the easier it is to forget who you really are. And she wasn't willing to lose herself to stay relevant. Because Agyness was never here to play the game. She didn't come to please anyone. She didn't mold herself into what the industry wanted. She made the industry mold itself around her. She didn't beg to be noticed. She didn't seek validation. She arrived like a lightning strike, changed the weather, and left before they could cage her. And maybe, in the end, that's the most fashionable move of all. Not a final walk, not a dramatic goodbye, but a single firm word whispered through action: no. Her influence didn't die when she disappeared from the scene, it multiplied. You can feel her in every flash of rebellion that runs through a new face, every bold casting choice that defies convention, in every creative who dares to challenge the mold, to choose presence over perfection, substance over polish. Because Agyness didn't just model clothes, she modeled freedom. She modeled control. She modeled the audacity to say, "I don't owe you anything." She reminded us that power isn't always in the staying. Sometimes it's in the going. Sometimes it's in the quiet exits, the decisions no one applauds in real time. In a world that constantly asks women to do more, give more, be more, Agyness showed us the beauty of doing less, of choosing yourself again and again. What's your favorite Agyness moment? Was it her punk debut, when she kicked down the door and redefined what beauty could look like? Was it her unforgettable Chanel walk, where she took one of the most iconic houses in fashion and made it look electric, raw, and new? Or maybe it was the day she simply vanished. No explanation, no farewell, no spectacle. Just a clean, quiet exit that said everything without saying a word. Let us know in the comments. And if this story moved you, if you saw yourself in her journey, if her silence said more to you than any headline ever could, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more untold fashion stories. Stories of rebellion, of reinvention, of women who changed the rules, not by breaking down, but by walking away.